people dominate the community in which he lives, and perhaps most of all, accumulate wealth without earning it. These are very charming and fascinating possibilities. But unfortunately, in most instances, they do not work out. Books are published now every day on points and with emphasis upon sheer materialism. Not long ago, in fact quite recently, there's a book been published on the legal aspects of cults and religions. And this book is more or less dominated or inspired by the complications on a legal level of individuals who are disillusioned, disappointed, and exploited in religious matters. How far can government, law, or litigation be involved in cases where individuals' religious convictions have been exploited? This is a grave situation, but it is obvious that the matter is getting to a point where some form of secular intervention is almost inevitable. There is going to be some form of legal recourse for persons who have been exploited in the name of religion. This does not mean that any sincere belief is going to be criticized. It does not mean that the individual is going to be denied the full expression of his faith or his inalienable right to seek spiritual consolation according to his own preferences and desires. It is, however, something that has to be faced in connection with the individual who, having supported or contributed to one of these movements, is suddenly exploited beyond a reasonable degree, or that the funds raised for religious purposes are directed to personal gain. Where this condition exists, there's going to be a great increase in care and thought, and there are going to be legal changes in the statutes which will protect the individual from dishonesty in the name of religion. Now, this does not affect most of us for the reason that the average individual is not really worried about that, except in certain cases where it should be obvious to him in the first place. But what is really the problem is how the person is going to evaluate his own inner experience with religion. How is he going to evaluate what has happened to himself on a religious level? Well, the only answer to this is to settle down quietly and do some serious thinking. And in most cases, people in trouble in this field will not do this. They are not willing to sit down and see their own mistakes. They are not willing to admit that they have been hoodwinked or that they have deceived themselves. They want to keep on pressing the points which they themselves have become accustomed to. I think probably that most of you have heard or read about a mirage in the desert. This is a phenomenon that is known throughout the world, and in some cases is very highly specialized. The most common form of it is that in the desert, an individual will look over towards the horizon and he will see, for instance, a beautiful grove of trees or an oasis, or perhaps even a stream or a lake against the sky. As he approaches it, it fades away, and there is nothing there but the desert itself. Now, a considerable amount of man's wishful thinking is like a mirage. It seems to be something very beautiful lying ahead, or out somewhere in the desert of wilderness of waiting and frustration. But as he approaches it, it fades away, because it is an illusion and a delusion. Now, each person must evaluate his own beliefs, his own religious convictions, to find out if there are among them some delusions or illusions. Otherwise, he will be constantly seeking that which has no existence or is not available to him under any condition. So we have the person who is waiting patiently for enlightenment. He is waiting day by day for illumination. He is waiting to have some strange and mysterious being or power take over his life and bring him to perfection. This waiting goes on and on. It does not happen because actually the individual has not thought it through. He has not answered a very simple question. When people ask me, and some of them I do, how it happens that they were so fortunate as to have an illumination, that at least what they thought was an illumination, and that have come under the special control or protection of divine beings, I've often asked them, how did you happen to deserve this? What did you do to earn it? Why were you picked out of 1,000,000 people to receive the deeper and inner instruction? And I've never had an answer that made sense. Most of them admitted they had no idea, that they didn't understand it themselves. They didn't know why they'd been chosen out of millions of people. So the next question is for those people who think it had happened to them to measure themselves and see what they might have inside that would have justified it. What had they done? What kind of lives had they lived? Did they rise above the commonplace in conduct? Were they especially honest? Were they dedicated? Were they good parents? Were they faithful marriage partners? Would they always do the thing as nobly and honorably as possible? Were they satisfied with a quiet life and moderate existence? What had they done that out of many they should be chosen? And they didn't know. And after looking them over carefully, it became evident that there was nothing visible to indicate their selection. They had no abilities. They had no understanding that was available to them. And sometimes these people went through a whole series of relationships with psychism or some metaphysical group, and they ended up where they started from, because they were not taught anything that was practical to do, even when they were under instruction. It was simply a case of wishful thinking, of a great desire which was not backed by anything. So wherever you start thinking about meditation or concentration or Zen or some discipline to unfold inner consciousness, the question must always be considered as to how qualified the person is to receive such enlightenment. How is he going to use it? How is he going to get away from his own futility simply by practicing a discipline of some kind, which does not contain within it any particular solution? A good example of this, of course, is the classical case of a young American who wanted to be a Zen monk. He went to the Orient, he studied there, and he sat very quietly in the corner and was ignored year after year. He was not picked up as a wonderful prime candidate and given all kinds of attention. And he remained quietly in the shadow of the temple for 10 years before one of the masters of the temple came and began to give him a little instruction. He had to prove himself. He had to prove that nothing could turn him away. He had to prove that there were no personal ambitions in himself. He had to prove that he was not out to be rich or powerful or dominate other people. He had to simply dedicate himself in a simple, direct way to whatever the rules were of the group to which he belonged. He wisely chose a group that had a wonderful background and was highly respected and revered for nearly 1,000 years. He was therefore reasonably certain that he was on the right track. All this type of thing finally sums up, I think, into the problems of the person's life. The beginning of life, in the lesser mysteries, as they were called in Greece and Egypt and India, the lesser mysteries are right here. The beginning of esotericism is in your home, your shop, and your business, and your relation with your children and friends. The beginning of philosophy is the daily use of common sense. Those who hope or aspire to enlightenment are the ones who live within their means, who do not cultivate debt, who refrain from unnecessary extravagances, and do not fall under those luxury pressures which contribute to moral or physical dishonesty. The individual begins here by putting his life in order. He also takes advantage, as far as possible, of the opportunities here for anything that he wishes to do. The ancients, when they brought some candidate to the temple, always required that this candidate bring with him an offering worthy of the temple. This was not an offering of money, because in ancient times most of the religious systems were subsidized by the state. What he was expected to bring was an ability. He was expected to have a proficiency that was useful, a proficiency which assisted him to be a better servant of human need, something that would help others, something that he could use because he was trained in it, and would therefore have a proper ability to use it wisely. Perhaps he was trained in medicine. He had taken a course in that in the temples of the god of healing. After he had graduated from that, he dedicated his medical knowledge to the service of humanity. And it was not until medicine was secularized that there was any known corruption in the medical world. Another might take law and become a leader of governments. One might become an instructor of children. Still another might become an artist or a musician, or perhaps intentionally and purposefully become an agriculturist and raise food for others to eat. He must have some dedication to the service of humanity, a dedication which was not only willingness but skill. He must be able to do this type of thing. If he was to become a teacher, he must have had the background for it. It was only the ability that he possessed that he could dedicate to God. His ignorance was of no value to himself or the universe. His wisdom was valuable to all who needed it. So the problem was to start here. Curb appetites, normalize life, rationalize experiences, live in a natural, healthful manner. Take care of the small daily problems as they arise. For if we are faithful unto small things, we shall be made master over greater things. But to avoid the small and rush desperately after the greater is to fail completely. Having gained this external knowledge of life, having proven conclusively the ability to be a conscientious householder, which means for the most part that the individual was able to withstand all material temptations that might lure him away from the development of his own integrities. When he had this achievement and had brought his gift to the temple, then a career was directed for him. He was given the means to do those things which he was trained to do, because to the religious mind there is no such a thing as secular learning. It makes no difference whether you're a carpenter or a priest. All is sacred. All usefulness is sacred. All uselessness is profane. Having therefore decided the area of service, the area of dedication, the individual becomes inwardly inspired to do the things which he has prepared himself to do. He started out with a determination to be prepared for a job worth living for. And this job unfolds with him. He doesn't have to have a very special attention bestowed by someone else. He doesn't have to take an aptitude test. He knows in his own heart, if he's dedicated, why he learned and what he intended to do with learning. And he uses it. And gradually, as a result of this, his inner life opens up. His inner life opens up because